G'day, I'm Ali Amo, and this is the Lease on Life podcast. In our last episode, we were looking at breaking the myth surrounding the personal growth and development industry. The idea that in order to discover who you are and to grow, it's best done alone. I challenged that notion and instead saw more potential in continuing your life as is and instead monitoring the relationships that you have, because the best chance that you have to understand yourself is to see how you operate and how you function in your relationship. Other people are the greatest mirror to uncovering the truth about the self. That's when the time that you spend alone in meditation or in reflection and journaling gives you the best opportunity to unpack the things that you discover in relationship to others. And tied to your relationships is environment to make the foundation strain of your web of life. So our next two episodes will be interviewing other people. And before we start exploring the perspectives that other people can offer, there is something necessary to discuss. And that is toxicity, toxic relationships and toxic environments. It's quite common for us to have a bit of both, be part of a toxic environment and to be in a toxic relationship in our lives. And there are some common threads, particularly given the fact that a relationship that you share with someone is its own environment. But there are some common things between the two. And connected to toxic environment is a cycle that we all have that tends not to be so positive. And that's the conflict cycle. So we're going to look at toxic environments in relationships and your conflict cycle today. The definition of a toxic environment is when negative, antagonistic, or bullying is baked into the culture of a particular place. And the reason people stay in toxic environments is usually out of fear. We do hear it commonly spoken about in relation to work environments. I'm not sure about you, but I've definitely been in a work environment that was toxic, and I stayed for years longer than I should. It was fear for me, not so much of finding another place to work, but it was to stop that career path altogether and venture into this one that I'm currently in now. The unknown of that path kept me stuck in a place that was gradually becoming more and more toxic, and it was very much baked into the culture. The irony of this environment is that I was there as an adult. For the children that were in that environment, it was toxic in a different way. I say toxic environment are like a natural disaster zone. You're constantly in fear, feeling little tremors, the earthquakes that are coming and tsunami waves that'll keep hitting you. Your emotions are like a tornado. There's just nothing but emotional destruction happening around you. And the main culprit, I suppose you could say, in your experience in a toxic environment, you just don't know the magnitude of the next eruption that'll occur from that person who to you is like a volcano. You want to try and keep things underground and quiet and calm, but at any point, something can erupt and your whole world comes crumbling down. Understanding the cycle that you participating in those toxic environments is crucial to understanding, because most people will try and just leave a toxic environment. If you're not aware of the cycle, you won't recognize it when it happens again. There are people who bounce from one toxic environment to another. It happens the same way in relationships. You don't necessarily walk into this heavy toxicity. It gradually develops over time. If you're not able to recognize the signs of that cycle forming, you won't realize it until it's too late. When we look at a toxic relationship on its own, there are a bunch of different factors that contribute to identifying whether or not you're in a toxic relationship. And it is very typical for people to focus on partnerships, romantic partnerships, and that kind of relationship being toxic. The ones that are not spoken about or given as much attention are the ones in the home environment. How do you know if your relationship with your parent or sibling or extended relative is toxic? In a friendship group, there can be one relationship that you have with a friend in that group that is quite toxic. And how do you manage that in the midst of the group environment that you share together? The way to identify is to look at these factors in your relationships independently. One of the major ones is isolation. It might be a parent, a friend, a colleague, a family member, a partner trying to isolate you. And it can be things like controlling technology, controlling where you go, how long you're away for, who you speak to. But a lot of it can be seen through the isolation of you in your other relationships. That stems from control, but based around jealousy. So if you have a friend who's jealous of you being friends with someone else, or a colleague jealous of you building a relationship with another colleague, a parent jealous of a friendship that you have, or a relationship that you have with a partner or with a friend and tries to isolate you. And jealousy is usually something people see on the outside, but it's how it is expressed and the way it's used to manipulate and control people's action behaviors. So as a result of that, not just jealousy, but walking on eggshells is another massive identifier of a toxic relationship. And that's when I was talking about the natural disaster zone, where you're constantly fearing that there's another earthquake coming, another eruption coming. It's like you see the clouds coming to indicate that there's another tornado coming shortly, and you do your best to try and manage that and stop these things from happening. That's not a healthy relationship. It makes you more of a people pleaser if you're walking on eggshells, because you're trying to eliminate the possibility of another negative situation happening in your life. The way communication unfolds in a relationship is a great indicator. Ideally, we all want to be able to communicate our issues, our thoughts, our emotions calmly and rationally. This is another thing that often in families we were never taught. And if you look back, it's like a generational cycle. If your parent, so your grandparents and your great-grandparents didn't have great communication in their marriage, that then trickles down to how the parents communicated with their children and how the children were exposed to different forms of conflict, depending on how it was initiated and how it was engaged in by the parents, teaches the children, and it's often what not to do. The only real opportunity for that to be corrected would be in the school environment. And many teachers don't take the time to have children practice healthy methods of communication, especially when there's some negative experience happening at the time. So a lot of children inadvertently perpetuate the cycles set before them. I know I did that. The silent treatment was my mother's massive go-to when there was a conflict. So that was replicated in me when I was in conflict with someone. It wasn't a healthy way, but it was all I knew. And so it was all I'd do. I'm 35 now, and the first relationship, proper partnership that I've ever had where I can communicate issues and resolve conflicts without a big escalation of an issue is in my current relationship. The biggest part of what makes that relationship healthy is the way we communicate. And both of us were not taught healthy methods of communication, and in fact, more toxic. When people cannot confront an issue that they have, cannot talk through an issue someone else has, to deny it, to shut it down, to ignore it, that is just as toxic as someone who screams the house down. to try and get a point across. Another way to understand whether a relationship in your life is toxic or not is to look at your autonomy. If there is an imbalance of autonomy, do you get to make your own choices for you? With all of these behaviors, blaming and shaming as a means of controlling behavior is massive. And a big problem with that is that the cycle of blame, the cycle of shame are both generational as well. Many parents believe that in order to correct a behavior that they dislike in their child is to shame them and blame them. It's more about how their behavior makes them feel. And that's what they're getting frustrated about. Instead of looking within and contemplating why the behavior makes them feel that way, if it really is bad, instead they go straight to blaming and shaming in order to control it. Many of us would have grown up with that as children, which makes that parent and our relationship quite toxic. As a result, later on down the track, once the child grows up and realizes this, when I did this too, there becomes a boundary setting in one way, but it's also just cutting off and distant, mostly to heal, but to stop that cycle from repeating. And I may have stopped that cycle from repeating with my mother and not had a relationship with her for the better part of 6 years, but that didn't stop me from getting in toxic relationships with other people and the toxic work environment. It wasn't until I understood how I allow that cycle to operate and how I function within it. I have to recognize when there's people or places around me where I'm noticing how I'm feeling. That's my indication that this cycle is starting. I have a choice whether I continue with it or not. And that can't happen if I just go along with the flow and then before I realize it, it's too late. It's too late. I'm already stuck in that. Learning to identify the cycle operating before you fully engaged in it, and this has become a massive part of your life, is crucial. And with the blame and shame comes things like disrespect, feeling unworthy, the big G, gaslighting. And a huge part of that is constant criticism, very much in that blaming and shaming realm. Criticism can be healthy, can be constructive, but it is so difficult to have a relationship with someone where the criticism is so constant, it becomes expected. I know from experience, the people-pleasing behavior starts because you're trying to avoid the criticism. In the end, you're just constantly matching that person's expectation, and they'll always find something to be critical about because it's a part of them. I had to work hard to make it not a part of me, because then you start self-inflicting that cycle. You criticize yourself and you're way harder on yourself than you need to be because you've been growing up with this toxic relationship, which makes, in many cases, your home, your school environment very, very toxic. So it's almost like getting into a toxic work environment afterwards. Like second nature, you feel at home because you're used to that, even though it's not good for you. So you've got to notice the things that you're feeling, the self-doubt. When you feel inferior, if you ask for something and it's a reasonable request and it's getting ignored, that means it's in favor of someone else's needs getting met. With the jealousy and everything comes possessiveness. It can very easily be a friend doing this as much as a partner. We see it a lot more frequently in relationships. I was with my high school bestie the other day and we're catching up. We hadn't seen each other in a while and I've always been close with her daughter. She's 16 quite soon. And she was telling me that she ended a relationship that hadn't quite formed yet. They were just seeing each other talking. I asked her why she cut it off and she said to me, I just couldn't handle the way he was talking to me. And I said, do you mean he was like trying to control you or the way he spoke about you? She said he was very controlling about what I wore and didn't want me to speak to any other guys. And I said, yeah, that's a big red flag there, the possessiveness. That's the work that that individual needs to do on themselves. And that's a lot of insecurity, but she's very young and doesn't know that. She just knows how she was made to feel, didn't like it, so see you later. The threatening and the lack of trust usually goes hand in hand. The possessiveness, the jealousy, blaming and shaming, unbalanced autonomy. And the other one is stonewalling. It seems like a very extensive list when you think about it. And you could very well have a relationship in your life that ticks some of those boxes and not all. Just because the environment that you're in or the relationship that you're in is toxic doesn't mean it's incapable of change and growth and evolution. This is where your conflict cycle comes into play. How you engage in or initiate conflicts can make or break a relationship. When you look at the statistics on marriage, the biggest problem is not that you have a problem, it's that you cannot articulate your problem to each other and talk it through. The communication's the bigger issue, not so much the financial stuff. It's how you can address these things. And no matter the relationship that you're in, I found your conflict cycle happens the same way, regardless of the relationship itself. It doesn't matter the scenario, the cycle remains the same. A lot of our conflict cycles form, like I said previously, in childhood because we witnessed the conflict cycles of our parents or the people we grew up with. So if you've forgotten how a cycle is formed, the formation of a cycle begins with an experience. And for many of us, it was the experience of witnessing our parents having a disagreement or an argument. From that experience, you gain knowledge. And what you learn as the fact is this is how people fight. This is how marriages look. This is how marriages sound. Then comes the integration of that. And part of that integration process is how you perpetuate that cycle around you. And it comes out in the final phase of the formation of your cycle, which is the expression. So the first time I had an argument with somebody at school, and every time ever since, I did the same thing. I'd scream. I'd not listen to their issue and only communicate mine. I was very aggressive. I wasn't very open to discussion. I just wanted to express myself, and then I'd back away and the silent treatment would ensue. I look back at that conflict cycle because I was a big initiator, and I wish I could say it stopped in high school, but it didn't. Now, I don't know about you, but with me, when there's an issue that I have, it can be confronting for the self to confront the issue with the other person. So what tends to happen is I'd let things build up. Something would hurt my feelings or frustrate me, doesn't matter who it is. And it's like I'd bank it for later. I'd act like everything's fine with them for the most part. Sometimes the other person could see that there's an issue, but I wasn't ready to confront the issue. So I was asked if you were okay, something up, what's the problem? Nothing. And it's like that, the meme that's out there about women. When she says she's fine, she's not fine. And so it may be 6 or 7 different things that are banked up over a couple of months. And I remember distinctly every single thing. So when that cycle finally gets to the point of expression, I never express it directly to the person that I have the issue with, because so much emotional and mental energy has been spiraling in my mind and body for so long. If I was to express that to a person, I cannot be calm and rational to the person. So I'd go to a best friend or a partner or a family member, somebody that I'm close to, and vent and express all of that negative energy physically. And it would infect my whole body to the point where I can't sit while I'm having that conversation. Even if I'm on the phone, I have to walk. Sometimes extremely fast, but I have to do that while I'm venting my frustration and expressing what my issues are and how that made me feel and how I've perceived something that someone said or did. In many ways, I seek validation. So coupled with my conflict cycle was the cycle of validation. I'd need someone to affirm that what I'm thinking is right, how I've perceived it is right, and how I feel is justified in this scenario. Never in this cycle of mine Did I ever look at me, what I could be doing, what I could be saying that would be irking them, frustrating them, hurting them? It was all about me. Granted, I haven't spoken to the person yet, but once it's like, that saying about opening the floodgates and all the tears and the emotions pour out. I had the aggression equivalent of that. Now that that conflict cycle has been expressed physically, I've been talking to somebody about this and the emotions are coming out and the thoughts are being shared. It's like something that was bottled in had the lid taken off and I've started pouring. What would happen then? Probably the worst part, because it's like everything's come to a head. Those floodgates have been opened. The lid has been taken off this bottle. So the poor person who has been doing sometimes very minimal things that aggravated me or something, and then it's just built up, will do next to nothing and I would just explode. Pure volcano at this point. I would erupt like a volcano over next to nothing because everything's been brought to the surface and has started oozing out of me. The smallest thing would then trigger the conflict cycle to go full circle with the person that I'm upset with. We always forget this, but it's important to keep in mind. Anger is very rarely your primary emotion. It might be the first thing that comes out of your mouth, but it is not the first thing that you felt. It always comes from a place of hurt and sadness. Part of it was my own inability to be vulnerable. But I really struggled to communicate the hurt, and it would just come out as raw anger because I just want to be heard and I want the pain that I felt to be felt by the other person. It was just horrible, horrible. And it cannot be resolved in that kind of place. This is why it took me 2 years to figure out how this whole thing works for me. I wouldn't say it worked for me, but how I worked when it came to conflict. But I never realized the connection between conflict for me in partnered relationship and conflict for me in personal relationships like friends, colleagues, things like that. The connection between them all, it would be the same for them all. Once I worked out that my cycle operates this way, no matter who conflict is with, I realized I had to break it. Even now, I have to stop myself from letting issues compound. That is a huge thing that people do. They don't say things every time something bothers them. In the moment they are just feeling, then later on they start thinking, and then it's suppressed, repressed, it's just banked for later. And if it never comes up and the inability to be confrontational is part of your cycle, being too confrontational and being non-confrontational are equally as negative in the effects that it has on yourself and on other people. It's a difficult cycle to break, but you need to recognize what your conflict cycle is, because that may be how you contribute to creating a toxic relationship or a toxic environment. In order to break my conflict cycle, I first had to face what it actually was. It wasn't pretty. But we can all assume that when we reflect on the people that we were, the things that we said and did, we do have that shame, the guilt, we blame ourselves very much for what went down in the past because we have no control over how we're perceived. And to be honest, the best way to look at it is where you are now. And if you're at a place in your life and at a point in time where you're comfortable being uncomfortable, in that you are comfortable enough to be able to face yourself and work through the feelings of discomfort that it brings you to realize how your cycle operates. It might take you 6 days, 6 weeks, 6 months to accept that this is what you do and this is how you are when this happens. But it's only at that point where you have the opportunity to choose whether you will grow from this lesson or whether you repeat the test and fail over and over again before you learn it. If you need help breaking these cycles, I got you back. And I can tell you, if you don't have to do it alone, don't. I did have to do it alone. And one of the biggest pain points that I had was that there wasn't another me to have my back while I did this. So I denied for a long time. I repressed and suppressed for a long time. I distracted for a long time. I avoided it, especially the parts where you have to face yourself because it's too easy to hate yourself. Having someone remind you that at the time that you were doing these things and you were unaware, you felt completely self-righteous. You shouldn't hate yourself now because you will no longer be that person. This is the point that you grow from. The last thing I will say in relation to the whole toxic environment, toxic relationship, and conflict cycles, because they all go hand in hand. When two people are in a relationship, it's not just one person's conflict cycle. Decide how the conflict cycle unfolds between two people. So in order to make your relationship as happy and healthy as possible, you should both be doing the work to understanding what your individual cycles are and then how those things play out when they come together. Thanks for being here with me for this app. New ones will come out to you every other Thursday. I hope you can become the passive spectator and graduate to the expert witness. And I'm here for you if you're ready to break the cycle. Take it easy and I'll see you soon.